Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo. And we're here today to talk a little bit more about Doom, just in a real casual sense. For the most part, everything I said in my first impressions stands 100% still. Doom was a fantastic ride. I finished the campaign this morning. An exceptional reboot of a classic, very much an evolution of traditional first-person shooter mechanics in a single-player setting. Doom easily fits right alongside of Machine Games' Wolfenstein reboot, both the New Order and the Old Blood, which are absolutely fantastic. In fact, playing Doom makes me want to go back and replay both of those so much. You know, just the idea that we can have lengthy, like, 10 to 15 hour single-player campaigns with such what people would call traditional shooting elements, that just works so well. It shows you just how important the details are in the development of games like this. You know, looking at the pacing, level design first and foremost, which I feel is something that games over the last couple of years have started to lack more and more. You know, we've started to rely on RPG elements and, leveling trees and progression systems, and we've forgotten how important level design is to the overall satisfaction of a shooter-style experience like Doom, like Wolfenstein. Just a huge applaud to id, man. Like, the only bad things I have to say about Doom, is that, the performance isn't consistent. And there's a few other small things that we're going to talk about in this video, but overall, the campaign killed it. There was a lot more story and background lore than I was expecting, and there's already a lot of people digging at some of the lore that was discovered inside of Hell. There's actually some tablets that you can find, codex entries, talking very specifically about Doom Guy and about some other crazy story elements. Now, I don't really want to spoil any of the story for you guys, but let's just say the game sets up for a sequel. That's all you really need to know. So that's exciting. I don't know if that's something that's ever going to happen. I mean, it took it a very long time to come back with something like Doom. I mean, obviously they lost their way. I think id's an amazing developer. I think they have some great people working there. Marty Stratton has been putting out outstanding games for a very long time. I personally enjoyed Rage, just felt that it fell a little bit short at the end of the day. So it's nice to see them back in form, and hopefully this is a huge boost in confidence for them to move forward and start working on other projects. Whether it's Doom related or not, I want to see id make more games. I don't want to just see the id Tech engine running games. I want to see the team at id making more frickin' awesome games. Let's step out of the reboot maybe, and let's see what they can do, again, from a original perspective, like they did with Rage. Again, man, I liked Rage. It had some amazing ideas. It was a beautiful game. I would really genuinely love to see them step forward. That being said, if they did decide that they wanted to take Doom and go another step further, I'd be totally on board for that as well. There's a lot of reviews that I've read, quite a few of them, that are like, oh, Doom's amazing, but it's really everything you played back in the original Doom. And I think that's the most absurdly ridiculous thing to say. Just because in a very core sense, they are similar experiences. The idea that they're fast-paced, circle and strafe style first-person shooters, that's really the only thing that this Doom has in common with the original Doom, from a very basic gunplay perspective. But there's a lot of other elements thrown into the mix now. Verticality that did not exist in the original game, is a huge part of the new Doom. Getting airborne is a huge part of the new Doom. I mean, there's an entire system around the thrust boots where you can eventually control your character mid-air. That's a huge part of, I think, further evolving, that fast-paced strafe and rush-style gunplay. It's not like other games haven't done that. Painkiller comes to mind, which was always exceptionally fast-paced, of course, by People Can Fly, the same people who worked on Bulletstorm. Games like that have definitely existed, but they faded away. And I think for the wrong reasons. I feel a lot of people look at a game like Doom and, oh, it's decidedly old school. Blah, blah. Well, sometimes you got it right the first time, Sometimes things worked back then. Why abandon that? So I don't feel that Doom feels old in any way. A lot of people saying that it feels like an old game. It doesn't feel like an old game. It feels like a game from 2016. Just because the design elements haven't been featured in a first-person shooter experience in the last 10 years doesn't mean that it's an old game, It's very well-polished, its design mechanics, everything just feels modern, obviously, there's bits and pieces of nostalgia. If you played the original Doom, if you grew up playing the original Doom especially, you have the secrets and the collectibles, you have amazing level design, which should not be something that we tie to the original Doom. That should just be something that we expect from first-person shooters, is good level design. And as I said, Doom hits that out of the ballpark. So, like I said, overall, guys, end of the day, super impressed with the entire campaign. But I did want to talk a little bit about some of the areas where I felt the game got a bit soft, where it definitely could have used a little bit more work to make it a much more exceptional experience. It already feels exceptional. There's no denying that. I'm not trying to downplay the game after I've spoke so highly of it, but there is no doubt that it has its faults, just like everything. And had these faults been repaired or altered, I feel like it could have been a much more consistent experience from beginning to end when we talk about that single-player campaign. So, I played on Ultra Violent difficulty, which is the highest difficulty apart from Nightmare and Ultra Nightmare, which are in a bracket of their own. Now, it should be noted that in Nightmare, the only difference in actual difficulty is that your character takes more damage from enemies. Enemies take the same amount of damage. There aren't any more enemies spawning on the battlefield as far as I've been able to see in the first 4 levels. That's it. Ultra Nightmare is simply permadeath version of Nightmare. So the difficulty, like I said, doesn't change by way of introducing more enemies or introducing more intelligent enemies. It merely lowers the overall health value of your character or increases the damage value of the enemy characters. Whatever they decide to do, I don't know. But keep that in mind as we move forward with this discussion now. So when you first boot up Doom, depending on your difficulty, and depending, of course, on your skill with first-person shooters, as this is a very fast, Twitch-paced first-person shooter, you'll slowly start to move into the groove. And by the 3rd level, if you're like me, someone who's spent a lot of time with FPS, you'll find yourself very, very comfortable. And the game will remain on a very good level of difficulty up until about the last 10%. And I know that sounds like a Tony, only 10%, why are you even talking? Well, let's just say it was about 3 missions in total, not counting the boss battles, where the game's difficulty couldn't maintain the skill level that I had obtained from playing the game from point A up until that point, you know, point B. And the biggest thing behind that is the lack of AI development. The AI in Doom is actually really, really bare bones and simplistic. They're on very straightforward AI paths, you know, like attack and ambush, but they don't have a lot of complex elements to their AI design. They don't communicate with one another. They don't really flank or coordinate against you. In fact, in most cases, they just rush at you blindly. You know, you'll have 4 revenants in some of the endgame hell arenas, and they're all just standing in a line getting blasted by super shotgun rounds. You know, it takes away any element of real challenge that could have existed from those more difficult enemy types. And that's the biggest and most glaring issue once you become really skilled within the game and, you know, you start to switch between all your weapons, is that even on Ultra Violent for me, some of these, you know, more endgame type arenas towards the end of the game should have been fairly challenging, but they weren't. No matter how many monsters, how many demons they tried to throw into the fray, the lack of overall AI intelligence prevented them from ever being seriously threatening to a ridiculously fast-moving Doom guy being played by moi. And I think the Revenant is probably one of the most noticeable of the demons to highlight, right? You know, the Revenant is supposed to be a pretty high-damage, deadly demon, and he's supposed to use his jetpack to get airborne to do damage. Well, in all of the hours that I've spent playing Doom's campaign, all of the missions that I've replayed for the sake of replayability, I've seen a Revenant get airborne and fire missiles at me maybe 5 times. Like, no joke. They almost never get in the air. They spend way too much time on the ground trying to take you head on where they can't really do any damage. Like, you know, there's no survivability or persistence built into their AI code. And it's the same issue with a lot of the high-end demons. The Baron will simply charge at you and smash on the ground. Very easy to avoid. The same thing with Hell Knights. You know, the Cacao Demon really is probably the most irritating one just because it range attacks you and it tends to hang out over areas where you can't get that close to it, so you have to dodge and then engage at it from a distance. And then the Mancubus, which again, another problem with the Mancubus is that it just doesn't seem to attack the player. It fires very slow-moving projectiles, which, again, if you're skilled and quick enough, can very easily be dodged. So that was one of the biggest issues I had, was no matter how, you know, the fact I'm playing on the hardest difficulty, essentially, I've played it on Nightmare, and I've seen this as well, the AI remains the same. You know, the only increase in threat, as I said, is that the enemy does more damage. So, for a difficulty mode like Ultra Violent, where it's supposed to be essentially the hardest difficulty you can choose outside of, like, the Nightmare bracket stuff, it wasn't challenging enough towards the end of the game, you know? And there was a few missions, I'd say there's about 1 or 2 missions in between, or at least arenas within those missions, where it was the same issue. When you're in the tighter maps, like a lot of the early game stuff like Foundry and, you know, like the Argent Center, these places are really great. There are a lot of challenge just because they're so tight-knit, there's a lot of close quarters combat, it really forces you to think outside the box and to really consider your movement and your mobility and like how you're navigating the environment to maintain... you know, to stay alive, essentially, when dodging a lot of these, you know, enemies, because they're coming in larger groups. But once you get to Hell, late game, as I was saying, you got a lot of larger arenas with a lot of jump pads and, you know, booster jump areas. There's, you know, speed power-ups. I really like them. The layouts are phenomenal, but again, the lack of persistence from the AI to make use of their abilities and to pursue the player in an efficient manner just means you just run around mowing them down. When the larger the level, the easier it is to actually survive as an individual. So things like the Pinkies, which are definitely a good way to throw in the mix, and usually they do catch you off guard, but on a larger map like that, once you recognize where they are, it's very easy to dodge them and evade them. And again, they're far more effective in some of the tighter environments. So I would say as the game opened up in scale, the difficulty curve dropped significantly. So it's kind of like you're learning the game, it's going up, nice and smooth difficulty curve, you're adapting to the different weapons and your abilities and the different creatures, the demons, and how they attack you, how much health they have. You're starting to recognize those things, you know, that's good. And then you recognize it, it kind of plateaus. Oh yeah, this is perfect, man, I'm doing real good right now. This is a nice bit of challenge, you know, retry missions, failing, succeeding and failing, and then you get to the end and it just drops off a cliff and it's like, oh, I run this place. And oddly enough, if you pay attention to the bits and pieces of the story with Doom Guy, you do get a slight element of satisfaction from annihilating everything in your path. But as someone who was really trying to push myself and be like, okay, you know, how precisely can I land all these shots? How well can I do here? That lack of challenge took away from the adrenaline factor that existed through the first 90% of the game's campaign, and that started to dip off. It was just worth mentioning, you know, because I was having such a good ride. I know this seems like, why even bother talking about this, Tony, if so much of the game was so good? Because, you know, it stood out to me, you know? It really did. Like I said, it hasn't impacted my overall feelings of Doom. I still believe it's an amazing game, but it felt like a really weak way to finish off, the, you know, what was otherwise an outstanding campaign. And that did. I think that left a little bit of a mark on me. The funny thing, though, is I'm really happy to go back and replay Doom up until that point. Like, I want to replay Foundry and all those other missions again on Nightmare, as I've been doing, but I know that once I get to that point in Hell towards the end of the game, I'm not going to really want to care for those missions. I'll probably check them out just to see how they are on Nightmare, again, knowing that I'm going to be able to take less damage. It might make things a little bit more frantic, but that first 90% of Doom, man, that was the sweet spot. It was glorious and it was so well crafted, and I guess I have to applaud them for that. Because when you look at, you know, creating a difficulty curve for a game like this across such a lengthy campaign, there's no way that's an easy thing to do. You know, and especially when you're trying to toss up the environment, you're trying to give us new areas to explore, you're trying to make these larger battle arenas. I guess I would have just liked to see one more difficulty level, or as I said, slightly improve the AI, you know, make them at least make better use of their abilities and their equipment. Now, the boss fights, I want to talk about the boss fights without actually spoiling them. I'm not going to specify in the boss fights, I'm just going to say that there are several boss fights in the game, and all of them, except for the final boss fight, are super well done. Some of the best boss fights I've ever played in a shooter game. You know, I think Deus Ex needs to look to Doom if they're still a little bit worried about the boss fights in the new Deus Ex game, because they really did an amazing job. And the last boss fight was actually, you know, well designed in terms of its mechanics and the things you had to recognize, but again, it was just too easy at that point. You know, I beat it in the first try. There was actually a boss fight, the first boss fight you run into, the first substantial one, about halfway through the game that took me 6 tries. You know, and it's not like I had any less gear or I had any less health. I was roughly at the same position, and I got annihilated over and over again. And then there was another boss fight after that again that was super well designed. I liked the patterns you had to recognize. Overall, the boss fights were really, really well done. But again, the whole last bit of the game, man, just kind of boop. It just dropped off in difficulty, and that was a little bit upsetting. That being said, guys, I'm really excited to go back into the game. The footage you guys are seeing right now is actually just me exploring old levels, trying to find all the collectibles. Exploration in Doom is wicked fun. And then again, going back to the earlier levels, you have that satisfaction of just going in there and annihilating demons, like the ultimate Doom Slayer. And that's really satisfying and a lot of fun. I seriously can't remember the last time that I booted up a first-person shooter like this and was excited to go back and like grab the collectibles. You know, so many games that we've seen over the last 5-10 years, Deus Ex is a good example, you know, game that has sort of completionist elements, like, hey, go back and play it again to get this and get that. And I'm just like, I don't care. But with Doom, I don't know what it is, man. It's like each level is a wonderful little sandbox of death and demon slaying. And I'm just more than happy to go back and explore it and find all of the Doom classic maps. And it's just, that's a huge positive, and that greatly outweighs any of the negatives I've talked about in this video. But as I said, guys, I was absolutely, you know, so overwhelmed with Doom when I first started playing with that first impressions video. I didn't want to, you know, forget that there was some critique to be had at the end of the day, albeit very small, and as I said, it did not truly affect my overall time with Doom. It's still a game that I deeply recommend. If you like first-person shooters, do yourself a favor and grab it. The single player is outstanding. Snap map is fantastically cool. The multiplayer is terrible. And I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm actually sitting here hemming and hawing for all day pretty much. Hey, do I want to do a multiplayer video? Do I even want to bother talking about it? I have nothing but bad things to say about the multiplayer, to be honest. You know, there's a few interesting game modes, but at the end of the day, it's just the core design element. As I talked about in the beta, I said it can't change. This is what the multiplayer is. It doesn't know what it is. It's such a confused experience, but maybe I'll put a video together and I will do it in the most positive way possible. I'll talk about why I don't enjoy the multiplayer and why I see it as you know, it would have been nice to have, I'm at that point now where it's like, I want to keep playing Doom. You know, they could have dragged me into the multiplayer had it been something that felt like Doom, but it doesn't. It feels nothing like Doom at all. Apart from being really fast-paced and having some of the same weapons from the campaign, and of course being filled with gore and demons, you know, the gameplay itself just isn't Doom. It doesn't fit a Twitch-based environment. It is like the mashing of two different game styles, you know, like a game with a really long time to kill like Halo mashed with, you know, something super fast-paced like Doom or Quake, you know, or Unreal Tournament. These are games that are wicked fast, that have very short time to kills, because when you look at the map for a game like Doom's multiplayer, Unreal Tournament, or Quake, it requires that the players die quickly, because if not, you end up in these elongated firefights with one player, and then guess what happens? You get killed by someone else. There's very few opportunities to actually 1v1 someone. And even in a team-based first-person shooter on a competitive level, 1v1ing people, you know, actually dealing with trades and 1v1s is a very integral part to the satisfaction of those multiplayer experiences. And you take that away with Doom because the players move too quickly and the time to kill is too long. There's nothing wrong with long time to kill, for example, in a game like Halo, but in Halo, your mobility is much more limited than it is in something like Doom. You can't move across the level as quickly, and again, there's a much smaller player basis. You're talking like 4v4 for traditional competitive Halo. Anyways, that's actually all I have to say about it, so I probably won't make another video. I just wish the multiplayer could have been more enjoyable. There are a lot of people out there playing it. I'm glad they like it. It's just not for me. It's not what I expected, and it's not what I was looking forward to. If you guys picked up Doom in the last couple of days, let me know what your thoughts are so far. Have you really been diving into it? You already beat it. You're looking forward to another replay. Like I said, guys, I can't recommend it enough. It's not often that I walk away from a game talking with you guys where I like glowingly recommend it. And this is one of those instances. If you like first-person shooters, do yourself a favor, make this the one game you buy this month. And then get ready for No Man's Sky next month. Anything else from me? Throw it down in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next one.